Met police officers have been briefed to intervene appropriately near Parliament if they hear or see breaches of the law in protesters' conduct towards MPs and journalists. Yesterday, Conservative MP Anna Soubry accused police of letting down democracy for not intervening as she was surrounded by a group of protesters as she walked to Parliament and was branded a Nazi and a liar. More than 50 MPs wrote to the Metropolitan Police Commissioner to express concerns about demonstrators at Westminster. So has the right to protest allowed harassment to go unchallenged? Let's discuss this in more detail with Lord Adonis, who wrote that letter, Labour peer and former Labour Cabinet Minister, and the editor of the online-only current affairs publication Spiked, Brendan O'Neill. Hello to you both, gentlemen. Thank you for joining us on the programme this afternoon. Lord Adonis, to you first of all, if I may. You have written this letter. Why?
Well, I just think it's unacceptable that people are being harassed outside Parliament when they're giving interviews. Our democracy depends upon free speech. Parliament is the citadel of our democracy. People need to be able to give interviews outside Parliament without being harassed by right-wing thugs who are calling them Nazis, traitors and so on. And this is unacceptable. And I think actually the police understand now that they have a big presence at Westminster. They do a fantastic job for us at Westminster as well, and they need to see that people can get to and from Parliament doing interviews with channels like yours. After it was on Sky that Anna Soubry was giving her interview yesterday, and they shouldn't be subjected to harassment which acts to suppress free speech.
Preventing free speech, Brendan O'Neill, editor of Spiked.
I'm really worried about the implications of this kind of proposed authoritarian clampdown on protests outside Parliament. The space outside Parliament is one of the most important public spaces in the United Kingdom. It's the place where for centuries people have gathered to demand progressive change, radical change, democratic rights. If we sanitize this area, if we say that only certain people, only lords and politicians and well-educated journalists are allowed in this space, and anyone who sounds too rough or too ugly for our liking will have to be hounded out, I think that will do real serious damage to democracy and to the democratic right to protest and to express your political anger.
Lord Adonis, you're trying to sanitise debate.
Well, I'm not quite sure what Brendan's saying there. There's a big difference between free speech and harassment. Harassment is against the law. It's not a question of free speech. Brendan can turn up outside the Houses of Parliament and say what he likes. And if your cameras are there and they pick him up, that's great. He doesn't have a right, and indeed it's illegal for him to harass and verbally assault people who are conducting their legitimate business outside the Houses of Parliament. That's what happened yesterday. I think any reasonable person looking at the film footage of what happened after Anna Soubry left that Sky interview yesterday would think this was utterly deplorable. It shouldn't be happening. I think most people accept that, and I don't think it'll be happening in future. I don't think it's sensible at all to conflate free speech with harassment. They're completely separate issues.
When do you think it crosses the line, Brendan O'Neill?
Well, the question is, that's exactly the question. Who gets to define what is harassment? My line is if there is any physical contact. And what I saw from the videos yesterday, I saw a pretty ugly protest. There was lots of ugly language. People were calling Anna Soubry a Nazi when she is quite clearly not a Nazi. Although I would like to remind Lord Adonis that he has compared the vote for Brexit to appeasement in the 1930s. So these rough and ugly people outside Parliament are not the only ones who are using inappropriate Nazi language. But the point is this, if I may speak frankly, it's not surprising that someone who is unelected, like Lord Adonis, and who derives his political authority from an entirely undemocratic source, and who seems to devote his every waking hour to trying to overthrow the largest vote in British history, it is not surprising that someone like that wouldn't understand how important democracy is. The vote is the only thing that ordinary people have. They do not have a seat in the House of Lords. They do not have newspaper columns. All they have is the vote. And when they feel that the vote is being trampled upon or that their vote is being ignored, they are going to take more direct forms of action. So the people responsible for these protests are fundamentally those politicians who are trying to overthrow what people voted for.
So I'll come back to you in a second, Lord Adonis. So you feel that these people are part of the Brexit debate and you don't feel that they have hijacked the debate for their own ends?
I think they are not at all, I agree with what you have said, Kay, in fact. They are not at all representative of the vast majority of Brexit voters. The vast majority of Brexit voters would not gather in public and shout Nazi at Anna Soubry. But I do think they are, whether we like it or not, they are part of the Brexit debate, and they are trying to push forward the idea that leave means leave. Now, it's my view, and I'm sure it's many other Leave voters' view, that they're doing it in a pretty bad way. But this is what politics is about. Politics isn't always polite and nice and friendly. Politics is sometimes angry, particularly today when the stakes are so high. So I'm not defending their protest, but I'm defending their right to protest. That's an important difference, and the right to protest is a crucial element of democracy.
Lord Adonis, we've heard that in different forms many times in the Palace of Westminster and the Chamber of the House of Commons over the centuries.
Well, I think Brendan's deeply confused because he said that he's defending the right to protest, which I thoroughly defend too. But he also said that he thought what happened yesterday crossed the line, that it's not appropriate to be shouting Nazi and fascist at people. And it's certainly not appropriate to be shouting it at them at their face as they're walking along the street in a way that is clearly harassment and extremely aggressive. Now, what I took him to be trying to do, which is often the case with people on the extremes in politics, is to have it both ways, to claim that they don't actually associate themselves with far-right thugs of the kind we saw yesterday, but somehow they have a right in principle to do what they're doing.
But that's what...
Let me be very clear. I do not think that right-wing thugs have a right to harass and to yell abuse and to be aggressive and threatening at any members of the public outside Parliament. It's not a question of whether they're MPs, peers, members of the media. It shouldn't be happening to anyone. It's a breach of the law, and I think Brendan shouldn't be using weasel words. He should be straightforwardly condemning it.
No, but I should condemn what I want to condemn. But the point I'm making is the whole nature of defending freedom, Lord Adonis, means that you defend freedom even for people you don't like, even for people you disagree with, even for people who are doing and saying things that you disapprove of. I morally disapprove of this protest, but that does not mean that I think it should be illegal or that the police should clamp down or that there should be an effort to sanitize the arena outside of Parliament, because that's a space which for centuries people have used, whether it was the apprentices who campaigned in the 1640s for the abolition of the House of Lords, or the suffragettes who gathered there in 1910 to demand the right of women to vote, who were, by the way, savagely beaten by the police for the crime of agitating too close to Parliament. This is a sacred democratic space, and any attempt to expel people who we simply find too unattractive will have long-lasting consequences for the right to protest more broadly. So we have to defend their right to do this, even as we condemn the things that they said.
Well, I think that's deeply confused, comparing right-wing thugs hurling abuse and being aggressive and threatening with suffragettes protesting before the First World War. I just think is comparing apples and pears. Either you think it is right or you think it's not right to be hurling abuse and being personally aggressive and harassing to people in the street, whether it's outside Parliament or anywhere.
Hold on a second, Brendan.
It's actually a breach of the law. It's not a question of free speech at all. It's a breach of the law to be to engage in harassment and aggressive behaviour of that kind. And the police appear to accept that. And I don't think that these events will be repeated.
I think
Brendan,
you are.
Sorry, if I can sort of take that argument a little bit further, if I may. I mean, it's like being a bit pregnant. It's either against the law or it isn't. It's either harassment or it isn't. And up till now, the police have decided that it is not harassment. They have been criticised for that. You feel, though, that the police have been acting appropriately? Brendan?
In fact, I'm sorry to drag you into the news story, Kay, but I thought you made some really sensible comments on 5 Live earlier today, where you said that these protesters know their rights, they clearly know what they are allowed to do and what they are not allowed to do, and they are acting within their rights. And it is the right of these people to gather on College Green and outside Parliament, so long as they don't use a megaphone, so long as they don't do particular things. It's their right to gather there and express themselves. We have to defend that right. I think Lord Adonis is the one who is confused, in fact. You know, for example, I strongly disapprove of the things that he has said about Leave voters, of the things that he has said about the democratic vote for Leave, of his comparison with leaving the EU to the appeasement in the 1930s. I strongly, morally disapprove of those comments, but I would defend to the hilt his right to make them, because I believe in freedom of speech, and I believe in freedom of protest, and I believe in the freedom of all people, whether they are lords or members of the riffraff, to express their political points of view. Defending the freedom to say something does not mean defending what people are saying, and that's what I think we have outside Parliament. These protesters, I don't like them, I don't like what they said, but they did not touch anyone, they did not physically threaten anyone, and therefore if we limit their freedom to say what they said, we are going to have consequences for all people who want to protest outside Parliament.
But do they, Lord Adonis, do they actually need to touch somebody, or do they actually, someone needs to feel that they have been harassed by their behaviour in order for them to be arrested? I don't know.
Well, actually, the film footage shows that Femi, who was the young pro-European activist who was also caught up in this, was touched as it happens. But yelling things aggressively in people's faces and pursuing them at very close quarters is a form of physical harassment. So it's not a question of defending what people have a right to say, and I defend everything that Brendan has just said. He has a right to say it. That's perfectly reasonable. If, however, as I leave this studio, he accosts me and starts yelling things in my face and being physically aggressive, which is what that is, then I don't think most ordinary people, including people who hold the views that he holds, would think that that was either appropriate or defensible. And that's the issue in this case. Now, the police said that they'll be looking at the footage and seeing whether any offences were committed yesterday. They haven't said that they think everything that happened was within the law. So let's watch this space and see what happens.
Final thought to you, Brendan?
I'm very worried about the consequences of these kind of demands for more police intervention into the space outside Parliament. You know, who is this space for? Is it only for well-educated people, posh journalists? Is it only for those of us who have a platform already? No, it's a space that is most important for those people who do not have a platform. Now, some of those people we will like, for example, the suffragettes. Some of them we won't like, for example, the protesters who are currently there right now. But that's the price we pay for living in a free democratic society. And I would put it to Lord Adonis and all other Remainers that they would not want to live in a society in which it was illegal or difficult for people to gather outside the political institutions of their nation and make their voices heard.
Well, of course, it isn't illegal or difficult to do so. So that's a complete red herring.
But you want to make it difficult.
It is, however, illegal to engage in harassment and aggressive acts against individuals, whether they are MPs, whether they're members of the public, whether they're journalists. And that is also a matter of ensuring that free speech is properly protected. Because if people think that they're going to be attacked in that way when they express their views, then they won't be expressing them because they'll be frightened. And fear is the enemy of free speech.
Gentlemen, we must leave it there, but I appreciate you very much indeed for coming along and talking to us this afternoon. Thank you.